Hi Dan, thanks for meeting me at such short notice. Getting a bit nervous because, just I just joined the poly and just had a week of lead time before I actually start teaching on Monday. So if you don't mind, would it be okay if I ask you a few questions?
Yeah, shoot away, mate.
Okay, so I've got the PowerPoints already, but I'm not sure about how actually do I go about teaching. When I went to ask my colleagues for help, they told me to just go and teach. Well, what does that mean?
Just go and teach, that's what they said.
That's right.
Okay, well, let me just throw that back at you. What does it mean to you, just go and teach?
Well, I suppose I have my PowerPoint ready. If you ask me how would I do it, I'll probably just take a cue from my old lecturers in the university and probably just show the PowerPoint slides and just, I suppose, try and teach them. I don't even know whether that's considered teaching, but I think probably I will use that as a model and teach the way I was taught. Does that consider as teaching?
Well, is that what you experienced when you were a student?
Yes, and I must say not all my lecturers were good. Some of them were just dead boring and uninteresting. I think the only reason why I passed university was actually because I was motivated enough to go to the library and do some further reading on my own. So I don't want that to happen to my students. So how do I do that? How do I ensure that there is good teaching in my classroom?
Okay, well, you've got to go in on Monday, so we can't spend a long time on this, okay? But just to give you some kind of frame now, you're starting, right?
Okay.
You're going in the classroom. As soon as you go in the classroom, as you know, the students are going to be looking at you,
of course,
making some judgments, right? And what you do in those first 5 minutes or so could be very important. So it's important to go in being very clear about what you're doing. So that you can get across to them, well, what are you going to do in this lesson? So you might say, right, at the end of this lesson, we're going to learn these things. And you might be able to show some examples of these things.
So is that like communicating what they are going to do for this course or the expectations that is required of them?
Yeah, it could be, if it's the first time, it could be a bit of an overview of the module you're teaching and then say, right, in this lesson, let's firstly start off with this. So what we're talking about here is something that we refer to in teaching as an instructional strategy.
Right.
And what that is, it's a plan of the methods that you're going to use, certain activities that you may bring into the teaching, some questioning, something that they do, and some other resources that you bring in. So the idea, you package this together, but you've got to start off with something, some kind of introduction, right? So what might get their attention and interest? So whatever you're teaching, think of something that might say, get them to look at it and say, oh, well, that's interesting, or, what does that mean?
Are you referring to like the Van Rostov effect? I remember reading about it in CT class.
Right, yeah. I mean, what that basically means is go in and do something a little bit different. Right. If a typical teacher just goes in and starts talking, that's typical. If you go in with an interesting statistic, an interesting image, cartoon or story or something that gets their interest, then you've got to think about, right, how are you going to deliver the content? So you need to organise that.
Okay.
Think about not doing too much at once so that you present it in a logical sequence. You might then use some PowerPoint slides that have got visuals to illustrate that. You might use a video. But the idea is to present that content in an organised way.
Right.
And at some stage, perhaps ask some questions, give them an activity, so that they're not just sitting there listening for long periods. Because we know after about 10, 15 minutes, if you're just talking, students lose attention.
Okay, so what's the point of the activity besides getting them to alleviate boredom? But why do we need to do activities? Why is that important?
Right, well the thing is, if you think about it, when you're actually talking, you're probably explaining some concept, some principle. You're trying to build some basic knowledge, some understanding. What the activity does is to get them to start thinking about what you've been teaching and perhaps applying it to some practical context. Or even if they're discussing amongst themselves around some question, it's getting them to check that they understand.
Right.
And perhaps generate some questions that can then help you clarify the meaning. So that's the basic idea of the activities. It makes it more varied and hopefully helps students to see the real world context of what they're learning.
So do I need to do a lot of activities? Do I need to make sure that I do all activities for my class?
Right, okay, now in a sense, kind of you're actually jumping ahead. Getting the balance between what you explain and the various types of activities and media, that's something that over time you'll work out in relation to the students you teach. whether you're going to use more or less activities. And it also depends on your learning outcomes. And that's something that let's discuss that next time we have a chat. What you've got to go in on Monday is with an instructional strategy to have some variation in what you're doing, so the students are active, a clear sense of purpose that you communicate to them what they're going to learn, and be very aware of what's going on. Try to read the mood of the group. If you see them getting a little bit kind of bored, then it's probably an indication that what you're doing is dragging on a bit.
Right.
So the idea is to have a strategy, and maybe one or two things that you might even decide what to do situationally, but don't make it too complex as it's your first class. But if you stick to the idea, you must have a strategy. You're going to have a beginning, you're going to have what you're going to teach, you're going to have possibly some activities, and then at the end there will be need to have some kind of recap. So you might say you might actually get them to do that and say, okay class, right, today we looked at this, what can you remember, what were the key things, write them up on the board, because that will reinforce the learning. And the other thing is, when you teach the students, look at the students, be upbeat. If you're enthusiastic, it's more likely to get their interest. If you go in there and you're kind of indifferent, or you look indifferent, you're looking around, then it's very easy for them to disengage. So think about instructional strategy. What are the methods, the activities and the resources you're going to bring into play for that lesson next week? Okay. Then what we'll do, we'll meet up, and then we'll have a chat, and then we'll take it a little bit further. But I hope that gives you some idea.
Yeah, it does. I think I have this great idea. So thanks for that. I'll just go and look at some of the resources that I think I want to try in my class on Monday, and I'll let you know how that works out.
Yeah, good luck. I'm sure you'll be good.
Thank you.